Do you ever feel trapped inside your own head, constantly bombarded by thoughts you never asked for? Most people spend their entire lives completely identified with their thinking, never once questioning who's actually doing all that thinking. This isn't just some philosophical brain teaser. It's the difference between living as a prisoner of your mind or as the one who holds the keys to the cell. The distinction between you and your thoughts might be the most important thing nobody ever taught you. And today, I'm going to show you why this question, if you're not your thoughts, who's thinking them, can completely transform how you experience your life. By the end of this video, you'll understand why most people are stuck in mental chaos, how to step outside the constant stream of thinking, and what happens when you finally recognize who you really are beneath all that mental noise. So who exactly is listening to these words right now? Let's find out. The human mind produces around 600 thoughts per day. That's about 42 thoughts every minute. But here's the thing. Research shows that up to 80% of those thoughts are negative, and 95% are repetitive, the same worries, regrets, judgments, and fears playing on an endless loop, day after day. No wonder so many people feel overwhelmed, anxious, and disconnected. But what if I told you that you're not those thoughts? What if you're actually something much deeper and more stable than that constant mental chatter? Think about it this way. Right now, as you're watching this video, try to notice your thoughts just for a moment. See if you can watch what your mind is doing. Maybe you're thinking, I wonder where this is going, or perhaps this seems interesting, or even, I'm not sure I understand this yet. Now, here's the crucial point. You just noticed your thoughts. But who or what was doing the noticing? This is the fundamental paradox of self-awareness. There appears to be a thinker of thoughts. But when you try to find this thinker, what do you discover? Just more thoughts. It's like trying to bite your own teeth or see your own eyes without a mirror. The thing that's looking can't be found by looking. And yet, there is clearly something that observes thoughts coming and going. This observer, this awareness itself is what you really are, not the constant stream of thoughts you typically identify with. Let's go deeper into understanding the thinking mind and how it shapes our experience of reality. Imagine a clear blue sky. Thoughts are like clouds passing across this sky. Some are light and wispy, barely noticeable. Others are dark storm clouds, heavy with emotion. But the sky itself, vast, open, unchanging, that's your awareness. The clouds come and go, constantly changing shape and form, but the sky remains untouched by them. It's the same with your thoughts and your awareness. The mind is like a restless monkey, jumping from one thought branch to another. It's always moving, always grabbing at one idea and then another. But you are not this monkey mind. You are the space in which this activity happens. Think about watching a movie in a theater. When you're completely absorbed in the film, you might forget the screen it's projected on. But the screen is always there, unchanged, whether the movie shows a peaceful scene or a terrifying one. Your consciousness is like that screen, the unchanging background to all your experiences. This distinction between thoughts and the awareness that perceives them has huge practical implications for how we live. When you completely identify with your thoughts, saying I am angry instead of I notice anger arising, you become trapped in your emotional states. You become a victim of your own thinking. But when you recognize that you are the awareness in which thoughts and emotions appear, you gain a kind of freedom. You can observe difficult thoughts and feelings without being consumed by them. You become the witness, not the judged or the judgment. Now, I know what many of you might be thinking. If I'm not my thoughts, then who am I? And who's doing the thinking? This is where things get particularly interesting and challenging to our usual understanding of who we are. The sense of being a separate self, a thinker behind your thoughts, is itself just another thought. It's the ego illusion. The feeling that inside your head is a little person who controls everything. But when you look closely, you find that thoughts simply arise on their own. You don't actually decide to think each thought. They appear in consciousness, like clouds appearing in the sky. Try this. For the next 10 seconds, don't think any thoughts at all. How did that go? If you're like most people, thoughts continue to pop up despite your intention to silence them. That's because thinking happens largely automatically, not through some conscious controller. Thoughts think themselves, in much the same way that your heart beats itself and your lungs breathe themselves. Most of the time, these processes happen without any conscious intervention. So to answer the question in our title, if you're not your thoughts, who's thinking them? The answer might be no one. Thinking happens, just as raining happens. We don't say, the cloud is raining. We simply say, it is raining. Similarly, it might be more accurate to say, it is thinking than I am thinking. This doesn't mean you have no influence over your thoughts. With practice, you can cultivate certain patterns of thinking and discourage others. But the basic process of thought arising happens naturally, without a separate thinker making it happen. Let's explore how this understanding changes your day-to-day experience. How does recognizing yourself as awareness rather than thoughts affect your actual life? First, it creates space between you and your mental activity. When troubling thoughts arise, worries, judgments, regrets, you can observe them rather than being immediately swept up in their current. Ooh, there's anxiety about tomorrow's meeting, rather than becoming anxiety itself. Second, it allows you to experience difficult emotions without being defined by them. Anger can arise in awareness without you becoming an angry person. Sadness can be felt fully without you becoming a sad person. The emotions flow through you rather than becoming stuck identities. Third, it gives you access to the present moment. When you're identified with thinking, you're usually lost in thoughts about the past or future. But awareness itself is always here now. The only way to make sense out of change is to fully enter it. Move with it and join the dance of life. I experienced this shift myself during a particularly stressful period. I was facing serious challenges and found myself consumed by worry. My thoughts were constantly racing with worst-case scenarios and self-criticism. But then I remembered this teaching. During a particularly intense moment of anxiety, I simply asked, who is aware of this anxiety right now? And in that moment, I realized I was watching the anxiety rather than being it. There was a spaciousness around the experience. The anxiety was still there, but I wasn't identified with it. That simple shift in perspective didn't make my problems disappear, but it changed my relationship to them. I could respond more clearly rather than react from a place of fear. Now, you might wonder, if thoughts think themselves, does that mean we have no free will? Are we just passive witnesses to whatever thoughts happen to arise? This is where the teaching becomes nuanced. True freedom isn't about controlling all your thoughts. It's about not being controlled by them. It's the freedom to observe thoughts without automatically believing and acting on them. Think of it like this. You can't stop waves from appearing on the ocean, but you can learn to surf them skillfully. Similarly, you can develop the capacity to work with your thoughts more skillfully, recognizing unhelpful patterns, cultivating positive ones, and most importantly, maintaining awareness of the difference between you and your thinking. A good driver becomes one with the car, not fighting against it, but flowing with it. The driver and car move as a unified system. Similarly, when you recognize yourself as awareness, you don't fight against thoughts, but flow with them, using them when they're helpful, and letting them pass when they're not. To remain stable is to refrain from trying to separate yourself from pain, because you know that you cannot. Running away from fear is fear, fighting pain is pain, trying to be brave is being scared. If the mind is in pain, the mind is pain. The thinker has no other form than his thought. This perspective doesn't lead to passivity, but to a more authentic form of action. Action that comes from your whole being rather than just your thinking mind. Let's talk about how you can begin to experience this distinction between awareness and thinking in your everyday life. One practice is simply listening, not just to sounds, but to your own thoughts. Try this. For a few minutes each day, sit quietly and listen to the thoughts that arise in your mind as if they were sounds coming from the environment. Don't judge them or try to change them. Just notice them appearing and disappearing in awareness. Over time, you'll begin to experience yourself more as the listening awareness and less as the thoughts themselves. Another powerful practice is to regularly ask yourself, what is aware of this experience right now? Whether you're feeling joy, boredom, irritation, or calm, pause and notice what's aware of those feelings. You can also experiment with what we might call purposeless moments, times when you're not trying to get anywhere or achieve anything, but simply being present with whatever is happening. Maybe it's while drinking a cup of tea, walking in nature, or even stuck in traffic. In these moments, you might glimpse what we're pointing to, a sense of being that isn't defined by your thoughts or even your sense of being a separate self. This is the real secret of life, to be completely engaged with what you are doing in the here and now. And instead of calling it work, realize it is play. Now, I want to address some common misunderstandings about this teaching. First, recognizing yourself as awareness doesn't mean becoming emotionless or detached from life. On the contrary, it allows you to experience emotions more fully because you're not caught in resistance to them. Second, it doesn't mean your thoughts are meaningless or that thinking is bad. Thoughts are extremely useful tools. They help us solve problems, learn, create, and communicate. The issue isn't thinking itself, but mistaking yourself for your thoughts. Third, this isn't about achieving some special state or having mystical experiences. It's about recognizing what's already true, that you are the awareness in which all experiences, including thoughts, appear. You are an aperture through which the universe is looking at and exploring itself. Let me share a personal story that illustrates this principle in action. A few years ago, I was going through a difficult breakup. My mind was constantly filled with painful thoughts, replaying arguments, imagining what my ex might be doing, questioning my self-worth. I was completely identified with these thoughts, and the suffering was intense. One night, unable to sleep, I went for a walk. It was around 2 a.m. and completely silent. As I walked, I became aware of the stars above me. Something shifted in that moment. I suddenly realized I was aware of my painful thoughts, but I was also aware of the stars, the cool air on my skin, the sound of my footsteps. In that moment, I asked myself, what is aware of all of this? And I experienced a profound recognition that I was not just my painful story. I was the awareness in which both my suffering and the beauty of the night sky were appearing. This didn't magically fix my broken heart. The thoughts of loss and pain continued, but I was no longer completely identified with them. There was a spaciousness around the pain, and in that space I found a peace that wasn't dependent on circumstances. This shift in identity from thoughts to awareness has profound implications for how we handle life's challenges. When you identify solely as your thoughts, life's difficulties can seem overwhelming. You're caught in endless stories about what's wrong, what might go wrong, what went wrong in the past. But when you recognize yourself as the awareness in which these thoughts appear, you gain perspective. You can still use thinking to solve problems, but you're not trapped in problem-formed thinking. You can respond to life's challenges from a place of clarity rather than reactivity. Think about someone who triggers negative emotions in you, maybe a difficult coworker or family member. When you're identified with your thoughts about them, every interaction becomes colored by your judgments and reactions. But when you recognize yourself as awareness, you can notice those thoughts and emotions arising without being completely taken over by them. This gives you the freedom to respond skillfully rather than react habitually. The same principle applies to fear, anxiety, or any difficult emotion. When you're identified with thoughts, fear can completely consume you. When you recognize yourself as awareness, fear still arises, but there's a spaciousness around it. You can feel fear without becoming fear. So we come back to our original question. If you're not your thoughts, who's thinking them? Perhaps now we can see that the question itself contains a hidden assumption that there must be a separate thinker apart from thoughts. But what if thinking is more like an activity of the whole universe, much like waves are an activity of the ocean? You don't say the ocean is waving. The waves simply are the ocean in motion. Similarly, thoughts might simply be consciousness in motion, with no separate thinker needed to produce them. This understanding doesn't diminish you, it expands you. Instead of being a small, separate self struggling to control an unruly mind, you are the boundless awareness in which the entire dance of life unfolds. You are a function of what the whole universe is doing, in the same way that a wave is a function of what the whole ocean is doing. Let me give you a concrete example of how this understanding can transform everyday difficulties. Imagine you're stuck in traffic. If you're identified with your thoughts, this situation might generate a stream of negative thinking. This is making me late. Why do I always get caught in traffic? That person just cut me off. This is so frustrating. These thoughts create tension, stress, and suffering. But what if you shift your identity from thoughts to awareness? You might still notice those same thoughts arising, but now there's space around them. You can see them as temporary events in awareness, rather than absolute truths that define your experience. You might notice the sensations in your body, the sights outside your window, the sounds around you. In that spaciousness, you might even find humor or curiosity where before there was only frustration. The situation hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has transformed completely. This is the practical power of recognizing yourself as awareness rather than thoughts. It doesn't change what happens to you, but it completely transforms how you experience what happens. Another powerful example is how this understanding affects our relationships. When we're identified with our thoughts, we tend to relate to the mental images we have of others rather than to the actual people themselves. We get caught in stories about who they are, what they've done, how they should be different. But when we recognize ourselves as awareness, we can be more fully present with others. We can listen without immediately filtering everything through our judgments and reactions. We can see others not just through the lens of our thoughts about them, but more directly. And this doesn't mean we become passive or let others walk all over us. On the contrary, we can respond more authentically and effectively when we're not caught in habitual thought pattern. Think about a difficult conversation you've had recently. If you were identified with your thoughts, you were probably focused on defending your position, planning what to say next, or reacting to what you perceived as attacks or criticisms. But what if you had been aware of those thoughts without being completely identified with them? You might have been able to listen more deeply, respond more thoughtfully, and perhaps find common ground where before there seemed to be only conflict. Let's conclude with some practical takeaways from this teaching on thoughts and awareness. Practice recognizing the distinction between thoughts and the awareness that observes them. When you catch yourself absorbed in thinking, gently remind yourself, these are thoughts appearing in awareness. When difficult emotions arise, create space by noticing them rather than immediately identifying with them. There is anger rather than I am angry. Take regular breaks from goal-oriented thinking to simply be present with your immediate experience. Remember that you don't have to believe every thought that appears in your mind. Thoughts are not facts. They're temporary appearances in consciousness. Approach your thinking mind with curiosity and compassion rather than judgment. The goal isn't to eliminate thinking, but to relate to it more skillfully. The beauty of this teaching is that what it points to is always already here, your own awareness, the silent witness that's been present your entire life, watching the show of thoughts, emotions, and sensations. You didn't come into this world, you came out of it like a wave from the ocean. You are not a stranger here. So the next time you find yourself caught in a storm of thoughts, remember to ask, who or what is aware of these thoughts? In that simple question, you might discover a freedom that was available all along.